Do you know how it feels when you actually buy a game as a joke? Something to laugh at with friends? And then you play it and you realize you enjoy it? Well, this is my experience of Balan Wonderworld, a game that is best described as missed potential and could be analysed forever to dissect its many faults and the poor business decisions that led to its critically panned release. But, despite its glaring problems, I actually see this as a genuinely fun game that does quite a lot right, even if it's tripping over itself whenever it gets the opportunity to. Balan Wonderworld is a AAA game with Square Enix money, deceptively beautiful cutscenes, and it's being penned by industry titans. This game is without a doubt a mess when judged on those merits, but as a game on its own right, I still find it quite fun. If this was a new indie game, or it was a 15-year-old B-grade platformer, I believe more people would pick it up and treasure the experience instead of just ignoring it. Once I separate it from its development history, I find myself just seeing the missed potential and loving what was actually executed very well. But I will start off with some of the most obvious criticisms before completely diving in. The Switch version is genuinely a mess, and that's the version I played it on. Now, I grew up on PAL consoles, and I used to have really bad computers that could barely even push World of Warcraft at 15 frames a second, so I get it. I can stomach a lot more than most people can. That's why I only play Ninja Gaiden Sigma on the Vita or Switch. I have a high tolerance for this kind of stuff. None of what I will say will defend the Switch performance. It is genuinely bad. But it's also funny, and it was something I could get past. If you do pick this game up, I would highly recommend getting it on any system besides Switch. The game is also terrible at communicating its story. You'll be able to understand some of it, but a lot of context was lost. However, there is an official novelization that fills in the missing gaps. And seizures. This game has patched out a giant mess so you can actually play it without succumbing to possible epileptic fits. But if you're unable to patch the game for some reason, then do not play this game for your own health and safety, please. However, if you are able to patch it, then this won't be an issue. I don't want to defend a game being released in this state. Even if it was rushed and an incomplete mess, it should at least hit retail without injuring its player base. I just want to state that this is no longer an issue for pretty much anyone with an internet connection. Now it's time for the proper endeavour into this game. To start with, if you own this game physically, the actual journey starts once you open the case, as we get a nice ticket to Balan's performance. What a lovely touch. The people that made this game really cared. I wonder what Team Balan is up to now. Oh wait. But this is still a nice welcoming. The game wants to lure you in before it turns into what it is. Once you start the game proper, you might do what I do and go straight to the options, and that was when the game's first problem actually started. And it wasn't because of the options themselves, they weren't bad, it was just the fact that all the buttons did the same thing. Instinctively, I hit B to take me back to an earlier menu, but that would not work because B mirrored the A button. So I had to manually select the back to main menu option. This is not a deal breaker, but this is something that I still could not get used to quite long into the game. However, once you get into the game properly and you've been catfished by the beautiful cutscenes, the game itself definitely starts, and yeah, it doesn't look great. This is where the game starts to feel like a 15-year-old B-grade platformer that has been up-resed. But I do like 15-year-old B-grade platformers, so that isn't necessarily a problem, just know what you're getting. It's like buying Tiger Tasmanian Tiger off the eShop. Old games like this aren't necessarily a problem, and they do still have their audience. But you play it, you notice the game doesn't look great, but you will notice the artistic designs themselves. The concept art for this game is still quite good, even if the actual 3D models and the execution of it isn't the best. The costumes you all get look okay, and the protagonists look fine. More so the girl. The girl actually has a more memorable design, and the boy looks like he's been dissociating every moment of the game. But they look fine. And Balan, he is obviously a great design. There's a reason they put him front and center. He looks like he was ripped out of a Sega Saturn era. But the visual aspect is by far the most impressive in its boss fights. The actual fights themselves aren't that amazing, but the bosses, look at them, they all look great, and their concept art's even better. Honestly, playing this game was worth it just to see what kind of boss design they would have up next. They never disappointed me from a visual aspect. The levels themselves do leave a little something to be desired, especially the first one, which is a terrible first impression. Here we have grass cubes floating over a void, and this area is far too open and flat. There is a reason for that. Each level will take on the aesthetic of a person who is manifesting them, and this level is about a farmer, so we play on a representation of a farm, so of course we get flat grassland in an open field. It makes sense, it's just that it looks very boring. And you know what? If they committed to it, I would compliment them for sticking to that theme. But it doesn't even do that properly here. Like, there are farming decorations, but there's also a castle. This doesn't feel right. But this is a simple first stage that will get you to grips with everything good and bad. Mostly bad in this case because the game does make a terrible first impression. You'll learn all the basics here, like collecting keys to unlock costumes, and those costumes give you different abilities. You may trade in your jump for a jumping attack or a higher jump, or something that can't jump at all but will have some kind of extra ability in lieu of that, whether that be a nice attack, a context-sensitive hookshot, or the ability to teleport behind barriers. I get that removing your jump is not seen as ideal, but I don't mind too much because you can carry 3 costumes on you at any time, meaning you can just swap in and out of those. When you want to jump, swap to a jumping one. When you don't need to jump, play around with the other costumes. This game's level design won't soft lock you if you're missing a mandatory jumping costume and have no access to it. It can mean there's a lot of switching costumes, which can get a little tedious, but this is more for people who are insisting on collecting every single item they can, and for casual players they won't have to keep switching too much. The amount of costumes you will get will soon explode as you get over 80 of them, a fact that they were all too proud of, and they were not all created equally. Some of them have very little actual usage, but I was surprised by the amount of variety and usage here. Sure, not all 80 plus of them are used, but I did use most of them and enjoyed doing so, which was a genuine surprise. But once you beat the game and want to collect everything, you'll probably gravitate to the most overpowered ones. The more I played the game, the more I genuinely enjoyed it. There are a number of reasons, even if I think the obvious one is my body's resistance just gave up, but I do genuinely believe this game gets a lot better after a few levels, and it will be consistently enjoyable for the most part. I saw a lot more variety. Stage 1, Act 1 might be a flaccid experience, but Act 2 changed things up a little. Balan's approach to level design is borrowing from the classic Sonic the Hedgehog school of design. We have 2 acts per level, and while they share aesthetic, there will be quite a few changes between each level. This is due in part to the costumes I mentioned earlier. Stage 1, Act 1 had some very basic stuff like a jumping costume or a slightly better jumping costume, whereas Act 2 gives us a stretchy boy and this pig that does a butt slam and this useless dragon I hate. But now we're mixing and matching a more varied group of costumes, and we can bring Act 1 costumes into Act 2, and things get a bit more exciting, and this will improve with each level as you get a wider arsenal of costumes to choose from. The level design of Balan is a lot of things, and while I wouldn't call it the most inspired, I do love how each one meshes with level-specific costumes to make each one a distinctive experience from the last. Our one water level has these water cubes which are quite fun to dolphin jump through. This bug-filled level is full of spider webs that we can climb if we have the appropriate costume, and this is expanded upon in Act 2 of the same stage, where we have to switch between light and dark so then we can flutter through the darkness. This game is not lacking in variety or creativity. By the end of the game, we'll be creating ladders that either prop up against a wall or fall down based on their location. We'll be doing chained homing attacks like a certain blue blur. We're walking on air and teleporting into areas that would otherwise be inaccessible. There is a lot of variety here, but it does come with the expected downsides. But most fittingly, we have over 80 costumes, and they all have one button to control, meaning if the costume can jump, its other feature is often out of your control. I hope you like shooting without your controls, speeding up at random, or just going invisible sometimes. I actually don't mind these at all. I do feel like they could have been improved upon with some cases, like a second button to manually shoot, but I do like the non-intrusive ones like the automatic on and off invisibility I mentioned. But I won't discuss the Box Fox though, I think everyone has heard enough of Box Fox. But hey, at least you're not limited and can switch costumes on the fly. This is a game all about options, and they're not all good, but they're all varied. Each of these costumes relate to a specific world theme like I mentioned earlier, and the people who manifested them, so let's get into them. I already mentioned the farmer and the bug-filled library about the girl who was ostracized at school for liking bugs, but we also have creative level theming like a level loosely based off chess with giant chess pieces littering the environment, or this burnt down building filled with lava and firefighter-based costumes, or this floating series of island with wind fans and balloons to tie into the theme of flight, and many more. They are all tied into the theming of the characters to some degree, and each of these 2-act journeys is capped off with an appropriately fitting boss fight, which are all fun, but mostly just there for the visual fare. And for the sheer weirdness of the fact that every boss fight ends with a fun dance number. But sandwiched around the boss fights are the only real cutscenes of story we get. These entail short vignettes on why the character has become disillusioned, and we cheer them up once we knock the crap out of them. Some of these feel inconsistent in terms of lore, like we can help people make the best of a bad situation, or we can turn back the flow of time, which is cool, I guess. The book may explain this more, but the game itself doesn't really go into this. And while the story may not be the easiest thing to follow, something that does follow you easily are the Tims. They're like the Chow from the Sonic games or the Nighttopian from Night, except these are cuter and can follow you into levels and get small collectibles for you. I never needed them, but seeing one of them bring me a key made this a more enjoyable experience. We feed these Tims until they become Tams, then we breed them and we use their slave labor to build a giant tower, which is beautiful to watch unfold. You can play the game and ignore them outright. This is all basically optional content for casual runs, but I do find it to be some great side content and makes me feel motivated to collect all the shiny things, and it is also required if you want the most overpowered costume in the game. And speaking of that overpowered costume, let's meet Balan himself. We can't play as them, but they are here in every level in the worst sections of the game. Definitely the most repetitive sections. These are everywhere. It's the same 2 actions over and over with slightly more animations, but not enough to feel fresh after it's been repeated over and over and over. Just feels like a lazy QuickTime event central, and while it is funnish the first few times, it loses its luster before long. I don't usually like QuickTime events. I think Shenmue is the only time I've actually enjoyed them, but I'd still take the weak use of them in most titles over what Balan does. This is a mess. This is the weakest part of the game without a doubt, and it is required for 100% completion, so I don't think I'll ever go for 100% completion. But it wasn't enough to detract from my actual enjoyment of the game, and this was an actually enjoyable game. I know I complained about a lot of faults, but this game has a lot of them. But the overall core experience, the moment-to-moment gameplay, was well worth it. I had a smile on my face the entire time I played, and I do look forward to replaying this. This is a fun game to lie back with, especially with others present. The music was always on point, and what it lacks up for in polish, the ideas fill in that void. I play 3D platformers a lot, and this game will stick with me positively even if it's not the best in any particular field. I'm glad I gave the game a chance, because it was a joy to sink my teeth into it, and I can only hope the sequel is as good. Oh wait,